Alright, so I understand that some of you may be slightly confused by now, but not to worry. You have clicked on the right video. And you may be wondering, what does this have to do with the beautiful game that we all know and love? But ladies and gents, before we embark on this journey, we have some business to take care of. So without further ado, roll the tape.
They didn't believe in us. They didn't believe in us. God did.
Ah, yes. How I've missed that Champions League music. But before we get started talking about the past season, allow me to take you all the way back to what we like to call the glory days. As a younger member of the Arsenal fan base, I've grown up with all the stories and heroics of a truly dominant force in the league, from the days of icons such as Ian Wright, Tony Adams and David Seaman, to the best team in our history, the fabled Invincibles of 03-04. Between 1997 to 2006, the Professor worked his magic, leading us to 3 league titles, 4 FA Cups and a Champions League final, which we don't talk about. Nonetheless, what we achieved during that period was sensational stuff, some of it etched in Premier League legend. But as you all know, we are in the year 2024, meaning it's nearing 20 years, yes 20, since we last won a Premier League title. And our rivals have been loving it. As a result, from my days on the playground, secondary school, college and now the workplace, I've spent the majority of my career as an Arsenal fan fighting for my absolute life, with past accolades as my sole defence against other fans. Fans whose clubs had since gone on to achieve, well, let's be honest, pretty significant accomplishments. Well, barring Tottenham. Honestly, if it wasn't for the Invincible season, a couple of FA Cups, and this man right here, I don't know if I'd be with you guys today. But moving on, the Arsenal journey can be broken down into several notable chapters, the first of them being a new home. The year was 2006 when Arsenal moved from the fortress that was Highbury to the place that we now call home, the Emirates Stadium. Things weren't completely shite at first, as we gained new ownership under Elisha Usmanov, who was the majority shareholder until 2018, along with the now renowned Kroenkes, who were only minority owners at the time. This was probably quite an exciting time to be an Arsenal fan, with expectations of a new, rejuvenated era of winning. Boy oh boy, if only Arsenal fans knew what was to come. What was supposed to be a fresh start and elevation of success was instead the beginning of a slow, painful decline. Having lost Vieira in 2005, the disassembly of the legendary 03-04 team was well underway, signalling the end of an era and welcoming what I like to call the top 4 trophy era. And believe it or not, this became something that was actually celebrated amongst the starving Arsenal fanbase for far too long. By 2008, the demolition job of the Invincibles had been completed, with notable exits of our biggest club legends. Bergkamp decided to hang up his magical boots in 2006, and Henry was set on taking his talents to Barcelona. What followed in hindsight wasn't a terrible time, as it saw Arsenal in the Champions League as a half-competitive team, with some truly world-class players over the years. Nonetheless, the decline was there for all to see. And although Arsenal were still comfortably a top 4 team, they never truly came close to threatening for the league title, with Manchester United firmly in the Ferguson dynasty era. This came on the end of some truly humiliating results in both the Prem and the Champions League, where we began to earn a name for ourselves as the whipping boys for the Spanish and German giants of European football. I mean, me and Bellerin still get fits to this day when we see the Bayern Munich flag. Ain't that right, Hector? For a club of Arsenal stature, it was finally time to admit that we had truly settled into mediocrity. But hey, you know, surely things couldn't get any worse, right? I mean, there's no... A saving grace for Arsenal had grown to be their consistent reputation as a Champions League club, but for the first time this century, they failed to qualify, which became the biggest indicator of the stagnation that had settled in. Stagnation was now shifting into decline, as we were being well and truly surpassed by rival clubs in this new era of football, where money was being splashed everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Everywhere except Arsenal, that is. Arsenal's frugal ways refused to get with the times, and Arsene Wenger became the undeserving flag bearer for this complete and utter failure to improve in the transfer market. This, coupled with the fact that top 4 was no longer a guarantee, spelled the end of an era for the man who had carried the club on his back for so many years. But it was unfortunately time to go! The inevitable retirement of Arsene Wenger left Arsenal with the impossible job of finding a replacement, but eventually a decision was made to bring in the undisputed king of the Europa League. Enter Unai Emery.
Good afternoon.
Now, although his time at Arsenal was far from a renowned success, I will commend Unai for taking on a job that most would shy away from, especially seeing as it meant taking on nothing short of a massive rebuild, and that's exactly what it was. All things considered, the 2018-19 season wasn't a total disaster, narrowly missing out on the top 4 by a single point and reaching the Europa League final. Despite the disappointment, it was more than what we had become accustomed to, which all in all spelled that the club was moving in the right direction. However, the Unai era was relatively short-lived and saw him leave the club in November the following year after a run of poor results and a misfiring Arsenal team, which appeared to be full of mediocre, uninspired players. Emery Ball wasn't pretty to look at, and his tenure didn't work out for a multitude of reasons, most of them arguably not his own fault, but to this day we can credit him for being the man who started the rebuild of our spine. But where do we go from here? The league table was painful to look at, player performance was in the mud, and there were no top-tier proven managers to take the mantle. Enter the prodigal son, Mikel Arteta. Best described as a Spanish Jordan Henderson during his days as a player, since retiring he had been working his way up the coaching ranks to eventually become an assistant under Pep during the absolute peak of the Manchester City dynasty. Nonetheless, his eyes never strayed too far from his beloved club, which he once played for and captained during his twilight years, and when the opportunity presented itself, he grabbed it with both hands, fully understanding the magnitude of the task at hand. Initial expectations for Arteta were limited, seeing as European football was already an afterthought and challenging for the title was a pipe dream, so it was a pleasant surprise for the gaffer to return to winning ways when he led Arsenal to reclaim a cup he was already familiar with.
To Arsenal!
With the FA Cup under his belt from the season before and a summer transfer window to secure reinforcements, the expectation was for Arsenal to finally kick on and at the very least challenge for the top 6 in 2020-21. But as if the footballing gods hadn't seen us suffering enough, another 8th place finish was on the cards, this time without any trophies to soften the blow.
So I have backed Arteta and I have seen the good things he's trying to do, but ultimately the job's too big. The job's too big.
With Arteta, I see more bad than good. I see a man who's tactically inept. I see a man who's out of his depth.
Questions surrounding Arteta's appointment and lack of qualifications began to surface. The frustration among fans was beginning to reach boiling point, and it finally began to rear its head on the Kroenke regime, and at the time, deservedly so. The Kroenkes had spent the majority of their time as owners in the shadows, rarely showing up to games or making statements which showed any sign of ambition. They were too focused on the LA Rams. As a result, they began to earn a reputation for running the club as a business, with no actual attachment to the club's success or failure. But enough was enough, as fans took to the streets in an attempt to get their club back.
We want Kroenke out, say we want Kroenke out! We want Kroenke out, say we want Kroenke out!
This did cause enough uproar to get a response from the Kroenkes, who just about remembered that they owned a football club. Yes, the real football. And going into the 21-22 season, they finally began to work towards the rebuild of Mikel's squad. In this season, the vision of the manager was starting to take shape, and Arteta Ball would be born. But it wasn't quite enough to see us recalled to the summit of club football. A run of games that can only be described as an absolute masterclass in bottling, at least meant to return to Europe, but showed the lack of experience and quality needed to make that leap to the next level. Nonetheless, this was a season where our most promising talents took centre stage as the main driving force behind the team, especially when we were struggling for goals following the Aubameyang saga. And once again, a familiarly poor January transfer window, where after losing our most prolific striker, the only move that appeared to make sense to the Arsenal board was to bring in our very own Captain America centre-back, Austin Trusty. But progress is progress, and the Cronkies used this opportunity to back Arteta to move closer to completing his vision, where the next step was to get rid of players who were, saying it nicely, now surplus to requirements, while simultaneously bringing in top-level talent. The 22-23 preseason finally arrived, and this was a notably different team, with fresh faces who took no time to settle. 4-0 against Chelsea, 6 against Sevilla. The servings we were handing out were generous. Just what have you got cooking for me, Mikel? It didn't take long to find out. Cue the 22-23 season. First 5 games, just the 5-5, no biggie. Great start, but calma, please. This form is definitely unsustainable. And of course, the reality check came. A decent performance away -1 Thomas Partey resulted in a 3-1 loss against United, which of course meant the wheels were about to fall off, especially with the next 3 games including fixtures against the tricky Brentford side, a Liverpool side who were practically invincible against us, and a North London derby. Please, 5 or 6 points would do very nicely here. Well, how about 9? But hold on. Let's not get carried away here. The winning was eventually going to stop, and surely Arsenal will be back to doing Arsenal things come Christmas. I mean, look at this freak of nature at City, about to smash every bloody goal record there is in this well-oiled, experience-heavy winning machine. Well, how about 5 points clear at the top of the table before the World Cup? But hey, slow down, Arsenal fans. There's no way that this team is actually good. It's all down to momentum, and a month away from club football was going to shatter any manifesting dreams of a title. And then, almost like a dagger to the heart, we lose our best player for 3 months to a freak knee injury. Where do we go from here? But the answer was there the whole time. It turned out to be a man widely considered as incapable of slotting into the starting 11. A man who we'd only seen make cameos to close out games so far in the season. A man blamed for our goals drying up towards the latter end of last season, hence our failure to qualify for the Champions League. A man with a fire in his eyes and a point to prove. Rise, Eddie Kedar Nketiah. The month of January was hit by Nketiah fever as he fought ferociously for the badge, and let's be honest, his respect from the fanbase, as he went on one of the best goal-scoring runs of his career, including a crucial goal at the death against the only team we'd lost to at that point, Manchester United. And what better place to do it than in front of the home crowd at the Emirates. What a time to arrive, son. Spirits were high, momentum was going, and admittedly, we were overachieving, sitting 5 points clear of our closest rivals in the league. But just on the horizon, we had the challenge of our first mega clash against Manchester City. Although this wasn't a league fixture, it was still a valuable litmus test for how these Arsenal upstarts would fare against the big boys of the league in the hunt for a treble of their own. And although Arsenal didn't win the game, they didn't necessarily fail their litmus test either, fielding a weakened team just like any team, prioritising a title push should. However, as they say, winning is contagious, but so is losing, and the ghost of Gary Neville's omen was finally coming back to haunt the boys in red and white.
Arsenal fans come at me every single week, because I will still continue to question them until I don't see a moment like I did with 5-6 games to go here last season, and they get through those moments, because they haven't proven it yet.
So how would Arsenal respond? Not well, apparently, as a trip to Everton saw us drop 3 valuable points against a rugged, desperate side keen to prove a point. Once again, Dashball prevailed. Even so, a comfortable cushion remained. A slight setback was always going to happen. On to the next, and it was Brentford at home. These were the types of games that we'd been winning week in, week out. But this time, it just wasn't meant to be. Another VAR fumble against Arsenal was just something you became used to at this point. But with the stakes this high, it was simply crushing. Big shout out goes to Lee Mason, by the way. What a guy. And finally, the matchup we had all been waiting for. The Sheikhs were coming to the Emirates for a must-win battle for supremacy. A battle that Arsenal lost. Thomas Partey's physicality was sorely missed. Tomiyasu, who had come in for Ben White, usually so dependable, dropped an absolute stinker. And since it was now February, the month of Nketiah was well and truly over, as the burden of being our only first-team striker visibly started to pile on him. A 3-1 defeat seemed to send a universal message to Arsenal fans. You're not ready to be here just yet. This feeling was all too familiar. Your dreams crumbling, banter from all corners, which is why the next game would be so crucial. Regardless of who we were playing against, it was season defining, and I'm sure the players felt it as well, because the next game was a must win. Roll on Aston Villa, and we were 0 down after 5 minutes, following a clinical Ollie Watkins finish. But we strike back, through who else but the one and only starboy Bukayo Saka, who lashed it in at the 16th minute. It's an end-to-end game, as Coutinho gave Villa the lead once again, and going into half-time, things were starting to look bleak. But after an onslaught of pressure, Captain Ukraine put away his first goal in the shirt, making the score 2-2. A heroic save by Aaron Ramsdale kept us level, but this game could not end in a draw, so we pushed and pushed and pushed, until finally a cutback by Gabriel Martinelli was met ever so sweetly by guess who? A Jorginho who was deemed washed, and a Chelsea 007 reject by many fans, including myself. But when that ball bounced off the bar, onto the head of Martinez and into the goal, all was forgiven. Eddie's grill was still flaming hot. The game was topped off with a Martinelli victory lap into an open Villa goal for a result built off the back of resilience, belief and desire, which read 4-2 to the Arsenal. Optimism had returned to the Emirates, and soon the wins followed, after a clinically executed 1-0 win at Leicester and a sweet revenge victory against Everton, who were on the end of a 4-0 gentleman's sweep. Then, Saturday the 4th of March came round, and it was Bournemouth, dead bottom of the league. Easy pickings, right? It looks like the Everton loss all over again, but to make matters worse, we were at home. Even despite Partey halving the deficit to make it 2-1, heads were still dropping, and belief was waning. Then, the 70th minute came round, and everyone's favourite nonchalant baller, Benny Blanco, smashed in his first ever goal in the red and white. Maybe, just maybe, we can salvage this. The boys kept pushing and pushing relentlessly up to the 90th minute, but credit to Bournemouth, they were holding on with everything they had. It just felt like one of those days. But the magic wasn't over, and like so many times this season, a hero emerged at the death. With the last touch of the game, Haaland delivered once again, as Reece Nelson arrowed in what was the shot of his life into the very top bins. After all the injuries, the loans, the doubt, this was his moment. And with everything he's had to overcome, it almost makes you dream about what could have been for the original Starboy. Business had resumed and the team was simply sourcing. Peak Arteta ball was back as we brushed aside both Fulham and Crystal Palace. Also, before it's mentioned, I'm not ducking it at all, but I can promise the haters that no one gives or gave a damn about that Europa League exit. If you had asked any sensible Arsenal fan at the time, that Saliba injury hurt a lot more than losing the whole tie. More than we came to realise. It was finally crunch time, the last 10 games of the season, and City were doing that City thing where they just refused to lose. So every Arsenal fan and their grandmother knew exactly what needed to be done to pull this out of the bag. And it started with dispatching Leeds in a convincing 4-1 win. But the real test was yet to come, as a trip to Anfield loomed, a stadium where we hadn't won since 2012. But this time, losing simply wasn't an option. The day finally arrived, and we strolled in exuding the aura of the superior team, and the football we were playing reflected it, and soon so did the scoreline, as we found ourselves 2-0 up thanks to some clinical finishing from Martinelli and Jesus. Maybe today was finally the day. But of course, Salah had to bag his customary goal on the cusp of half-time, and suddenly, things start to look shaky. The whistle blew for the second half and the Liverpool PMP was in full effect. To make matters worse, the Anfield cauldron had been well and truly shaken after a tussle between Xhaka and Trent, and from that point on, it was all about survival. A missed Salah penalty felt like fortune was finally favouring us, but the footballing god said otherwise, as Firmino rose off the bench to give us the middle finger one last time, after Zinchenko got absolutely ripped by Trent. Despite coming back from 2-0, they still weren't satisfied, as it took a superhuman performance from Ramsdale, who pulled off some ridiculous saves to bring home what could either be viewed as a significant point or 2 points dropped. I'll leave that to you to decide. After conceding a 2-0 lead from the previous game, Arsenal had learned their lesson, and definitely wouldn't throw a lead like that again. After a sensational 30 or so minutes of football and goals by Jesus and Odegaard, a careless, borderline arrogant Thomas Partey is dispossessed by Rice, who drove towards the box, leading to a penalty. After being on the back foot of what had now turned into a back and forth game, a golden opportunity rose to put it to bed and get the title race back on track after Antonio gifted us a penalty. And despite being in a poor run of form by his own high standards, there was only one man who was going to take it. But on this occasion, our Starboy couldn't sprinkle his magic dust and place the ball narrowly wide. Then, in true Arsenal fashion, we concede an equaliser to Jared Bowen and hold on helplessly for a draw. With 4 points dropped in the last 2 games, the pressure was truly building. But as you've probably learned by now, Arsenal are a club that learns from its mistakes, and after giving away 2-0 leads in back-to-back games, it was finally time to switch it up. So once again, in true Arsenal fashion, it would only make sense to be 2-0 down in the first 15 minutes against the Southampton side who were destined for relegation, after a combination of comical defending and goalkeeping. To make matters worse, one of the scorers was our very own Theo Walcott. Despite Martinelli pulling one back, Southampton managed to restore their 2-goal cushion in the second half, and from then on, it was always going to be an uphill battle. A goal apiece from Odegaard and Saka in quick succession was too little, too late, in a game that had to end in a victory, as it finally appeared that Arsenal had run out of miracles. Although the light had dulled in the eyes of many, for the optimists there remained one last opportunity. As it stood, Arsenal were top of the league, but in name only, as City were hot on our heels with 2 games in hand. So it was fitting that the next game would be a title decider between the 2 teams who had been far and away the best in England. The stakes couldn't have been any higher, as Arsenal headed to the Etihad to face the best team in the world in an attempt to steal their crown. But what followed was an absolute schooling. Arsenal couldn't get near City that game, as the gulf in experience, quality, mental fortitude and know-how became all too apparent. Arsenal lost every battle on the pitch that day, and even on the touchline, as Guardiola showed that he was still the Mr. Miyagi to Arteta's Daniel Son.
Done. Other side. Look, always look.
A 4-1 defeat spelled the end of the road, as the rest of the season seemed like a courtesy to at least push City to the last day. And as impressive as the away win at Newcastle was, successive defeats at Brighton and Nottingham Forest confirmed what Arsenal fans had already known for a long time. The tank was empty and the league was well and truly lost. As much as people will hate to admit it, the ghost of Gary Neville had come to haunt us, as his assessment of this Arsenal team proved to be pretty much spot on. But putting the banter and disappointment aside, I can wholeheartedly say that this was the first time I've ever felt so proud of this football club that continues to be a part of us, whether we like it or not. The fight, unity and ambition showed by players, fans and staff alike was an absolute joy to behold. Have mistakes been made? Yes. Could this season have gone better? Absolutely. Was this team always going to fall short? Maybe so. But I choose to believe that this is the start of something special, and potentially a new era of renewed belief and prosperity for the sleeping giant that's reawakening right before our very eyes. Wait, hold on. Before you leave, for those of you who've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed your first Peak for Peak experience. And if I've entertained you for a whole 30 minutes of your life, you could show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Help a brother pay some bills, especially if you want more content. So once again, thanks for watching guys. Until next time.